Okay, folks. Well, I told you the title of Descartes' work is Meditations on First Philosophy. It's not a religious meditation, even though he brings God into the picture, but he's basically trying to get away and do kind of what Plato urged the prisoners in the cave to do. Sort through their beliefs. He believes he's had a lot of false beliefs creep into his own mind, and they've also come into philosophy. But the big thing to remember is his overall program is aimed at searching for foundations for knowledge in philosophy and the sciences that will be as certain, as beyond doubt, and as eternal as the truths of mathematics or the truths of geometry. And so he does this by using a skeptical method, which we said has several names. Methodological skepticism. Methodic doubt is the one that I have heard used the most. Radical doubt. All right, so how does he try to find these certain foundations? Well, what he does is he tries to eliminate false beliefs from consideration, not because he's proved them false, but he thinks that since he's looking for a principle or principles that are so certain that they're absolutely beyond doubt, if he can raise a doubt about a belief or a group of beliefs, and he does question groups of beliefs, then that's going to be enough for him to set them aside and say, well, these beliefs aren't what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for an absolutely certain, indubitable principle, because I've just raised a theoretical doubt about them. So you have to understand that in Descartes' real day-to-day life, he doesn't doubt anymore that he's in a real room, seated with a fire going on, and he's in his easy chair, and he's writing, and he really has a body. He doesn't doubt this anymore than you probably doubt that you're really on the second floor of a real building with real other people around you. But he uses skeptical argument to raise theoretical doubts. And the idea is that if he can raise even a way out in left field theoretical doubt about a principle, then that's not what he's looking for, since he's looking for principles or a principle that is absolutely beyond doubt. So that's why he needs to examine his beliefs and also to examine the foundations of philosophy. So as I said, what needs to be done to put philosophy and the sciences on firm ground is to find some absolutely indubitable first principles that will function like the axioms did in Euclid's system of geometry. Everything in the whole system is derived from 4 or 5 basic truths or axioms. And the axioms themselves are so obviously true that they're beyond doubt. Principles like the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So he's looking for a firm foundation. So the way he's going to treat his current beliefs then is he's going to set them aside, at least for now, as if they're false, if he can raise even the slightest doubt about them. Now, he doesn't need to go through every belief individually. That would be a non-starter, right? Furthermore, we said he doesn't have to prove them false, only raise a doubt about them. And also, since he's not going through beliefs individually, what he's doing is he's raising doubts about whole classes or categories of beliefs. And he's in the same rationalist tradition with Plato. And you'll recall that for Plato, the knowledge of the senses is secondary. What counts as real knowledge is what we can discern by our reasoning abilities, not by the senses. Through the senses, from Plato's perspective, the most we get is opinion, and the best we can do is true opinion versus false opinion. So Descartes, it shouldn't surprise us, raises questions, first of all, about the whole category of beliefs that we get through our five senses. And you'll recall that, in Descartes' day, they knew about optical illusions. They knew about the look of a ruler. If you put it in water, it looks bent, but it's not really bent. And Descartes knew that for distant objects or whatever, our senses could deceive us. But he says, what about the things that I see around me, immediately around me? He says, they're very clear. And it seems beyond doubt that here I am, Descartes, sitting in my room by the fire with a pen and paper in my hand on which I'm writing the meditations. I have a real body, and this is a real hand. How can I possibly raise a doubt about knowledge that's not vague because it's something in the distance or whatever, but this knowledge that's about things around me? Well, this is where he raises his dream conjecture. I'm still following this syllabus. And the principle it calls into doubt is the principle that defines a class of beliefs we get via our senses. So Descartes says, well, haven't I had very vivid dreams where I thought I was doing exactly what I think I'm doing now? That is, sitting in my living room, and everything seemed clear to me. And then, lo and behold, I woke up to find myself unclothed in my bed in the next room because I was asleep and dreaming. And so he says, well, why couldn't I be asleep now? And it's important to see why he thinks we can't provide any tests that would absolutely distinguish waking from dreaming. If we can't absolutely distinguish it, then he can use this conjecture that he might be dreaming to call into question what his senses tell him. So he says even what seem to be good tests, like noticing our eyes are open or reaching out and touching our hand, he says even these things can be done and experienced in a dream. So he says there just aren't any sure tests to enable him to distinguish a dreaming from a waking state. And so that means he can now cast doubt over the group of beliefs that he gets from his senses. But where Descartes has come here is he's not only raised skeptical doubts about our experiences of what's immediately going on around us, like that we're in a real room with real people and you're seated in a real desk chair. But what this calls into question, I mean, none of you take seriously so what does these skeptical arguments call into doubt are also any knowledge claims from empirical sciences, ones that claim to be based on observational data, sciences like astronomy and chemistry and physics. So, science is not made doubtful by the dream conjecture. Well, remember, for Descartes, mathematics is a science. We don't usually think of it today as a science. But he says, you know what, I can raise doubts about some of my beliefs with this conjecture that I might be dreaming. But there are other beliefs that don't succumb to this kind of a way of raising a doubt about them. He says, among these are the beliefs of mathematics. Why? Because Descartes is convinced that even if we're dreaming now, even if, say, that whiteboard that seems rectangular isn't a real whiteboard in a real room in a real, setting, but is an imaginary dream object, Descartes says, still, that rectangle's got to have four sides. It's got to have right angles at each corner in order to be a rectangle. Same with a square. He says, see, there's 1 + 1 erasers there. Well, Descartes says even if those were dream erasers, there still are 2 erasers there. 1 + 1 is going to still equal 2. So he says, I can't call into doubt the principles of arithmetic and geometry just by conjecturing that maybe what they concern is imaginary dream objects. Because he says, still in a dream, these principles hold. So how does he raise doubts? Well, here we get in to really the hyperbole of hyperbolic doubt, extreme, exaggerated doubt. Now, Descartes is the one who gave us the ontological argument where he gives us the properties of God, and he knows that in the traditional Christian concept of God that has come down to him through the Roman Catholic Church, God is morally perfect. If God is morally perfect, it doesn't seem like God would be intentionally deceiving me about my most fundamental beliefs. But he says, what if there were some malevolent entity? He calls it an evil genius. Some people call it an evil demon, but whatever, it serves the same purpose. That was systematically throwing me off when I tried to do a math problem. And so as a result, I was having false beliefs about mathematics. Now, again, he's got to go way out on a limb to raise a doubt about such certain knowledge as the knowledge of mathematics. But this is the way he does it. And as I said when we went over this before, to make it more believable, think, well, have you ever messed up a problem on a math test or even in math homework, right? And it was corrected because you performed the wrong step somewhere along the line. You made a mistake. Well, again, Descartes says, suppose you had some evil entity throwing you off every time you tried to do a math problem. Then he says, if that's the case, even the conjecture that there could conceivably be such a malevolent being out there, even that conjecture should be enough for me to cast a theoretical doubt on even the principles of mathematics. So he says, the combination of the conjecture that I might be dreaming, but also if there were a powerful enough evil genius at work, then he says that would give me a reason to doubt just about everything I experience. My beliefs about mathematics, also my beliefs about whether I'm living in a real world, whether Descartes says whether I'm real, whether I have real hands and a body. And it's important to see that for Descartes, it's doubtful that he has a material body. But he says, even if there were an evil demon or genius deceiving me about every belief I have, the one belief he could not deceive me about is that I'm here to be deceived. In other words, if I'm being deceived about everything else, I still have to exist, says Descartes, in order to be deceived. If I am by virtue of these skeptical arguments calling everything into doubt, he says the one thing that I can't doubt is that I'm here to raise these doubts. I'm here to do the doubting. Now, both being deceived and doubting are mental operations. They occur in our minds. So Descartes says the one proposition that I can't get away from, that I cannot doubt, is that I exist as a thinking thing or a thinking mind. In other words, what he means by thought are that our mind is capable of having various mental operations in it, affirming things, denying things, willing things. And so he says, if I'm being deceived, then I'm still a being that has mental operations going on in me. If I'm doubting everything, then I'm still here as an entity that can doubt. So he says the one proposition he cannot doubt is that he exists. The way he says it in the Meditations is something like the statement, I am or I exist, is true every time I think it or conceive it. But the way you and I have heard his basic principle, even before we ever took a philosophy class, was the way he advances it elsewhere, as cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. So Descartes, says that he is an immaterial soul, essentially. And here, this is what forms the basis of the mind-body problem. We haven't spent a lot of time on it. If I ask you a question or two on it, that may be all. But for Descartes, matter, including our material bodies, has traditional Newtonian properties. A material thing is located in space. It's Newtonian space is capable of motion in space. It occupies space to the exclusion of other bodies. Is perceivable with the senses. And there's another property or two but these are the main things, especially extension in space, that for him are the properties of a material substance like his body. But he says, I've already put anything with those properties into doubt by the arguments I've considered. But he says, what am I? Again, as a thinking thing, he says he's essentially an immaterial mind or spirit. And for Descartes, immaterial substance, whether you call it soul or spirit or mind, he uses those terms almost interchangeably. Immaterial substance is not located in Newtonian space. And as I said, the way to make this a little more believable is to think of yourself as having two separate thoughts, like the thought that there are two erasers there on the whiteboard, and the thought that Navy lost the football game last night, right? Now keep both of your thoughts in the head. Where is the thought about Navy losing the football game in relation to the thought about there being two erasers there? Is it in front of it, behind it, to the left of it, to the right of it? And if you're inclined to say, well, it makes no sense to say the two thoughts are spatially related to one another, well, Descartes would say, well, that simply confirms what I'm telling you, that immaterial minds are not located in space, in traditional Newtonian space. Plus, he goes back to a point that was made as far back as Plato, and it gives you an automatic argument for the immortality of the soul. And that is, if you think of immaterial souls as being like mathematical points, if you remember in geometry, how is it that on a finite line you can fit an infinite number of geometric points? Well, of course, the answer is they supposedly have no extension in space. So if they're not extended, you can fit an infinite number of them end to end. Well, how does that apply to the soul? Well, the thought, going all the way back to the time of Plato, was that an immaterial soul or substance is not extended in space like a material thing. So, matter and mind for Descartes have absolutely different properties. But now, here's the thing. In order to, I didn't make this copy, but often I make some coffee in the morning before I leave with the old Melita method, which requires me heating some water in a tea kettle and pouring it over the Melita filter. Now, if I turn the gas stove on, but left the tea kettle across the room, I would not do a very good job of heating up water for coffee, would I? Right? If I took a match out of a box of matches and I waved it here when the striker is in my hand, I'm not going to do a very good job of lighting the match, right? A cue ball needs to roll into another pool ball in order to get it to move. What is the point of all this? Well, causes and their effects seem to be what Hume called contiguous. That is, they need, somehow the cause needs to come into contact with something to produce the effect. Well, that means they have to touch each other spatially. But for Descartes, immaterial minds or spirits aren't even located in Newtonian space. So this is just one of the things that raises the issue. Well, how is it if the mind or soul and the material body are what Descartes says they are, how can he explain mind-body interaction? That mental events can cause physical events and vice versa. And the answer is he can't explain it well. He tried to by speculating that the pineal gland or pineal gland at the base of the brain is of such subtle matter, as the way he put it, that it can be moved even by the immaterial mind. But what is the pineal gland? At rock bottom, it's also a material object located in Newtonian space. So Descartes has as big a problem trying to explain how the immaterial mind can move the pineal gland as he has explaining how it can move the rest of the body. So this has been a traditional problem for dualism. Now, I think there are ways to answer it, but I'm just bringing that up. Like I say, I'm not going to do much on the mind-body problem. So, just one more thing. He tries to say, with the wax example, that Descartes tries to stand on its head our normal perceptions about what we know for sure. Most of us would say, even if, say, for religious reasons or otherwise, even if we believe we're a dual entity, a mind or spirit inside a material body, most of us would say, if somebody said, well, what are you more certain of? That you have a material body or that you're an immaterial soul or mind? I think most of us would say, well, there are a lot of direct experiences I can have that confirm for me that I have a material body, but whether I have an immaterial mind or spirit is a matter of faith. But for Descartes, he's trying to convince us of exactly the opposite, and he's also trying, again, as a rationalist, to convince us of the primacy of reason over the senses. He says, take a piece of wax, heat it up. If you heat it short of melting, but when it's pliable, well, maybe its color changes, certainly its texture changes, it may smell differently after being heated. In other words, Descartes says, if you heat a piece of wax, all of the properties that the senses can detect have changed. And yet we still want to say the heated wax is the same wax as it was before it was heated. So he says, what enables us to make that inference, to come to that conclusion? He says it can't be anything that the senses tell us. because all of the properties in that wax detectable by the senses are changed. In other words, everything the senses would tell us would say is different wax. So Descartes says it's the mind alone, it's our reason that tells us it's the same wax. Now, I have a problem with this. When I was a poor graduate student, instead of being a poor adjunct professor, sometimes I used to make brownies from scratch. I mean, real from scratch brownies, where you're heating a couple of squares of Baker's unsweetened chocolate in a double boiler, right? So you take 2-ounce squares and you put it in a double boiler and you watch it. And you watch it melt. And now all the properties those 2 squares had in the box have been changed, right? Those 2 squares of chocolate are now a little puddle of chocolate at the bottom of the pan. And yet I would want to say, yeah, but that chocolate sitting at the bottom of the pan is the same chocolate that came out of that box in 2 solid squares. And Descartes would say, now, what enables you to say that? It's certainly not your senses. Oh, it's not my senses. I stood here and I watched the things melt in the pan. And yet, Descartes, you're saying, it's not my senses, but my reason that tells me it's the same chocolate. Excuse me, I would beg to differ. So anyway, I'm not going to say very much about that. But so Descartes tries to set knowledge on a firm footing by finding at least one solid principle that he says will be like an Archimedean point, a fixed point from which we can get absolutely certain knowledge. So what he thinks is, from this principle, and maybe some others he can derive from it, he can set the rest of knowledge in math and the sciences and philosophy on such a firm footing. Not math, it already is on a firm footing in math as far as he's concerned. On such a firm footing that it's going to be like the principles of geometry. Now, when we look at empiricism, I'll go over how it is Descartes thought he could do that just from the principle that he exists. But for right now, we'll leave it at there. Okay. Well, if someone has any